Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to the Actors Equity Association Stage Manager Panel, Reading and Understanding Equity Agreements. My name is Ruth Kramer. I'm an Equity Stage Manager, and I serve on the National Council of Actors Equity. Today's panel is sponsored by the Membership Education, Stage Manager, and Entry to Equity committees. It is my pleasure to introduce the panel moderator, Claudia Lynch.
Hello everyone, and welcome. Thank you for coming. I think the first thing I'll do is introduce all of our other panelists and then give you a little brief introduction of why we're all here today and what we hope to do with this panel. I'll start down at the end. Erin Maureen Koster is a freelance theatrical and events stage manager. She's worked with the Atlantic, the Public, Classic Stage Company, New York Stage and Film, Williamstown, Bay Street Theater, EST, Epic Theater Ensemble, and the Roundabout. She's worked on the World Science Festival, various galas, launches, upfronts, and fashion shows, and she's a member of, I should have asked this before, what's the Caborca?
Caborca, yes.
Caborca. She's a member of Caborca, a mom, and holds an MFA from Columbia. And she is a proud member of Actors Equity Association since 2007 and was recently elected as the Eastern Stage Manager Counselor and serves 10 equity committees, and she's a core member of Fair Wage on Stage. And to my left is Bernita Robinson. Her Broadway credits include Ragtime, the original, Thurgood, Man of La Mancha, the revival, A Moon for Miss Begotten, and among others. Her regional credits include Alabama Shakespeare Company and Pioneer Theater and Kansas City Rep. Her off-Broadway credits include Signature, Second Stage, The York, and others. And she currently serves on the Council of Actors Equity Association, and she's been an equity member since 1984. To my right is Ruth E. Kramer. Ruth has regionally done 20 seasons and 38 productions as a freelancer at the Pittsburgh Public Theater, and as well as stints at the Weston Playhouse, Alpine Theater Project, Alabama Shakespeare Festival, Lyric Theater of Oklahoma, Riverside Theater of Vero Beach, Shakespeare Theater Company, Arkansas Repertory Theater, Pioneer Theater Company, Goodspeed at Chester, Great Lakes Theater Festival, New Jersey Shakespeare Festival, Mountain Playhouse, the Maine State Music Theater, the Algonquin Playhouse, Trinity Repertory Company, and the Actors Theater of Louisville. She's worked in dance productions, the Pilobolus, thank you, Pilobolus Dance Theater, and a 3-year international tour and a New York season. And Ruth has worked in 40 states and the District of Columbia, and proudly serves on the National Council of the Actors Equity Association, and she's been an equity member since 1983. Mont is the third vice president of Actors Equity Association, which is an office held by a stage manager, as we all know. He was elected in 2003 and is currently serving his 5th term. Ira has been a professional stage manager since 1987. 18 Broadway credits include Cats, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, Ghost the Musical, The Norman Conquest, The Revival, Young Frankenstein, the producers from the very first day to the very last, Love, Valor, and Compassion, the national tours of And Butterfly, Fame, the musical. Off-Broadway credits include Full Gallop, and you also directed it at the Philadelphia Theater Company. I Do, various shows at the Manhattan Theater Club, Playwrights Horizons, Vineyard Theater, Cotton Club Parade, and New York City Center Encores, and 7 years as a production supervisor for the MCC Theater. Ira has been an Actors Equity Association counselor since 1996, and he chairs or co-chairs various committees, including the production contract, which he served on 7 negotiations, 3 as co-chair, the Stage Managers Committee, Public Policy and Constitutional Review. He has represented equity at the AFL-CIO, the DPE, the FIA, and the COBUG, He is the first vice president of Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, where he chairs the Grants Committee. and is trustee of the Equity League Pension, Health, and 401k Trust Funds. Ira is also the past chair of the Stage Managers Association and is an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University School of the Arts in the Theater MFA program. And Ira has been an equity member since 1987.
Claudia Lynch. Claudia is an equity stage manager and coordinator of the BFA Stage Manager program at the University of Central Florida. Her credits include Rock of Ages, A Catered Affair, Company, Little Shop, The Light in the Piazza, The Rivals, Dinner at 8, and Contact, all on Broadway. 9 productions at Encores, including the recent The Bubbly Black Girl Sheds Her Chameleon Skin. Off-Broadway, Passion at CSC, LORT Theaters, The Alley, The Old Globe, Cleveland Playhouse, and Arena Stage. Equity member since 2002.
So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we decided to come together and do this panel. And it comes from various situations. One is that after many years as a stage manager, just about 3 years ago, I ventured off into the world of academia and started teaching in a BFA stage management program. And so I get the opportunity every fall to teach an entire class of upperclassmen stage managers, and the entire focus for the semester is learning how to read and interpret the equity agreements. And what we're able to do is I teach based on the production and the LORT contracts, and I compare and contrast them, and teach them how to read the language, right? And how to go back and forth between the different rulings to be able to figure out and follow the language. And then I have my students pick an agreement that they're interested in, and then they have to come up with a sort of lesson plan, and they have to teach their classmates what they have learned about that agreement. And that opened my eyes to what do I know about these agreements that I've worked under for my entire career? What is new and surprising now that I'm poring over the agreements in a way that's just slightly different than I was before? And for the first time ever, I'm looking at the agreements side by side instead of looking at the agreement that I'm working under at that moment, right? And so it's been really eye-opening to me, and it's been eye-opening about how do we talk about this with each other within the union? How do we talk about this with early career stage managers? How do you learn how to read these agreements? How do you learn how to be the person in the rehearsal room that's making decisions based on an interpretation? The other thing that sort of prompted this is because I started teaching, I have made an effort to connect with other stage managers, and not just in New York, but throughout the country, trying to learn more about how everybody else does it, and what other options and what other techniques and what other questions I can bring to my students. And what I found is these days there is more interaction with stage managers, and social media sort of helps that interaction with stage manager to stage manager, that we are asking each other, what do you think? And one of the thing that comes up the most, the thing that we all as veteran stage managers will say the most to early career stage managers is call your representative, right? Call equity, call your representative to talk with them. Don't guess and don't make decisions on your own. Have an open dialogue with your representative. So all of that was what prompted this idea of let's bring together some veteran stage managers, some both early career stage managers and veteran stage managers I see in the room, and our representatives from equity, and to be able to have a discussion about working under these agreements. Right. So the first question I'm going to ask the panel is, what is the first thing you do when you're hired to work under a certain agreement? And is your path changed if you've worked under it often, or if it's the first time you've worked under that agreement? What's the first thing you do?
Would you like to start?
Yeah.
Nobody
Dive
wants
in,
to speak.
Bernita.
The first thing I do after I check out what the minimums on that contract are, I look at the hours and I go through the contract and highlight, if I have a paper copy of it, highlight all the rules that pertain to the rehearsal hours, the days. You know, some contracts have 5 days you can work, some contracts most of them are 6, but there are some that have 5 day work weeks. So I go through the contract and highlight all of that, and that's the first thing. That's actually the second thing I do, because like the first thing I do is look at the minimum. But that's what I do.
Going along with Bernita, if it's an agreement I know well, like the LORT agreement, I don't really do anything with the rule book. I do, however, call the rep for that theater and say, hi, this is who I am, and I've just gotten a job stage managing in this particular theater, and is there anything you could tell me about that theater? Do they have any concessions? Are they asking for any concessions? Is there anything that's often, are you called as a business rep often about this theater, and what might I need to know ahead of time? That's something very specific that I do.
I've been fortunate enough to be working on the same contract for almost the last 25 years without much variation, and I've been very embedded in the crafting and negotiation of proposals. So even as the contract has evolved, I've been very aware of what it's been on the production contract. The most recent moment where I did have an opportunity to have to look at a contract was when I did Encores a couple of years ago. I did Cotton Club Parade at New York City Center Encores, and the Encores agreement is a separate agreement. It's an AGVA agreement that I was under, so it was not even the equity Encores agreement. I was under an AGVA contract, so I did have to look at it. I was pleased to see, well, both pleased and sort of mystified, but pleased to see that the AGVA contract is very, very similar to the production contract, to the equity production contract at City Center. So it wasn't difficult to go through, but the thing to always look at, and it's what I always tell people, and both Bernita and Ruth have said it, is the rehearsal hours and the tech hours. That is sort of the key rule structure that you really have to get your head around. Knowing what the minimums are is always a good thing. And indeed, whenever you have a question, your business rep is always the first person to call.
I think the only thing I would add is that as somebody who went mostly back and forth between various contracts, so not usually using the same contract back to back to back to back, I would always also visit the stage manager section, because there are different rules about what you may not do, what you may do on a side agreement, what you need to negotiate a side agreement for, etc. So that's another thing that I would also take a look at upon accepting a new gig.
It's interesting because I have a different experience on Encores, because I've been doing now for the past number of years doing a variety of Encores, and the Encores has a letter of agreement based on the production contract. And so for the Encores agreement, just going through that, what's different from the production contract and what is similar. And for every agreement, I think we all have the same basic structure, and we look at things. What I tended to do, whether it was a new agreement or one that I had worked under many times, I will use the subway trips to read the contract, which is why I am a paper person, and I was very unhappy to give up my little spiral bound rule books. But I take it on the subway and I search through, and one of the things I do is I go back to the index section. And after looking at some of the key places that I know I want to brush up on, I actually just scan through the index and try to find the things that are going to pop in my eye of, oh right, I don't know that I can spout that information off the top of my head. Let me go and look at that language again and see. I will tell you that I think probably for all of us, this is hard-won advice, and those of you who are veteran stage managers in the room probably agree with this, that I think many of us have found out the hard way that oh yeah, I know this agreement, I know what that rule is, I don't need to look at it. And I think that we have all learned to go back to language always, and go back to the business rep always. The next thing I wanted to bring up was, speaking of an introduction to the agreements and how you start out. We all talked about when we became an equity member, right? But I think that, like many of you out there, when I became an equity member is not when I started my journey and my career in working with the equity agreements. And so I was hired in 1996 as an intern on an LOA to LORT agreement on a little theater in Ohio, and subsequently worked at a number of regional theaters on the LORT agreement, and in fact had, before I became an equity member, had worked on more than one Broadway show as a production assistant. And so as an intern, as a production assistant, you are not the one making those interpretations. You are not making the calls in the agreements, but you are certainly learning the context behind the language and learning the language by working with the equity members that you're working with. So I'd like to ask the panel, like, what was your experience starting out working with the agreements?
Well, I'll start since I'm diametrically opposed to you. I never had any experience with any equity agreement until I got my equity card. I was all non-equity PSM and dance stage manager before I got my equity card. I got my equity card in 1983 on a mini contract, and my first experience with an equity rulebook was to pick up those few sheets of paper that comprised the mini contract at that time and read them. And I went on from there, obviously reading contracts the way we've discussed in the previous section. It's great to have the background before you get there. I have recently worked in a place with lots of non-equity production assistants and interns, all who are very, very interested in the rule book and will be way ahead of me once they get their equity cards.
That's interesting. Anybody else?
I started life as an actor, and therefore didn't look at any agreements until I turned to stage managing. I joined Equity in 1987 on an SBT contract in St. Louis. A friend I had gone to Circle in the Square with had me come out and for the whole season. And I had been dabbling in stage management, and I was interested in it, and I seemed to have a knack for it, and she had me out for the season to perform in half of the shows and stage manage half of the shows. Actually, the first show I did was as an actor, so I got my equity card as an actor. But because I was also stage managing, I did have to read the SBT agreement as it existed in 1987. And I kind of never turned back. That's when I made the transition, although I returned to New York to continue pursuing life as an actor. 1987 to 88 is when I transitioned to becoming a full-time stage manager. And over the course of those first several years of my stage managing career, I worked SPT, LOA, New York City LOA, Off-Broadway, LORT. So there were a lot of readings of rule books in those early days of my stage managing career. And the rule books have always been, the LOAs tend to be, somewhere between 5 and 15 typewritten pages, but the actual, any rule book you encounter is a doorstop. And so really reading through them can be a chore, and I learned quickly, to be honest, Michael Ritchie, who is now the producing artistic director of the Center Theater Group, was sort of the guy that got me on the road. He was the resident stage manager at Circle in the Square when I was there as an acting student. He's the one who said what I said earlier. Look at the rehearsal hours, look at the stage manager rules, look at the performance rules. The rest of it you'll figure out as you go along. And that was my path. I didn't do it like Ruth until I joined Equity.
The first time I had an equity actor was summer stock at a small college in the middle of Ohio. He was the only equity actor on the show. I had no idea that there was an agreement for him. All I knew was that there was an equity actor. I was like 20, maybe 21, and I didn't do theater until college. So I didn't have a whole lot of experience in the first place. But I was hired to ASM a couple of shows and then also to PSM, the first show. So I was the PSM and they told me they had this equity actor. And the only thing that they told me is that you had to take a 5-minute break after 55 minutes. And you had to take a 10-minute break after an hour 20. And they put the fear of God into me about this as though like the equity police would show up and then hit a minute after 1:20, and it would be the end of the world. And the director also threw in that he liked to have a cigarette every 55 minutes. Yeah. So he would prefer to stop then. So I stopped a tech run after 55 minutes because I had to give that actor his break. And it was one of the most embarrassing things that's ever happened to me. Everybody in the room was like, why are we stopping? What's going on? And I was like, we have to take our break. So that was my very first experience with equity. I had no idea. But then once I moved to New York, I moved here to go to Columbia and get an MFA in stage management. And so I read all of the contracts in a student context. I think as a lot more people do now than would have in your experiences. And so that was, by that time, by the time I actually then hit working equity contracts with any regularity, I had read most of the pertinent ones in that context and had professional stage managers to ask questions of.
I'm trying to remember my first equity contract. I grew up in the city, and when I was growing up, there was a program called Teenage Performing Arts Workshop, and I belonged to that. And in that were Broadway people who came to teach you how to dance, how to sing, and we put together a show. And that was the first time I looked at and knew what Actors Equity was. So my first experience reading a contract was long before, I hadn't even graduated from high school. And I was reading equity contracts, and so I've been reading them for a long time. And I honestly, I wound up stage managing or assisting on that show, the show that we did in what would have been my junior year of high school, and then actually got a job as an ASM understudy on an off-Broadway show. So I guess that was my first contract. I don't remember.
That leads me to a question. I think I'll start with Erin. Erin, would you tell me, because I'm seeing this experience through my students, would you tell me that from your experience of learning the agreements in a almost classroom situation and then putting them into play working as a stage manager, is there anything that pops out at you as something that you just couldn't get the context, didn't understand the context until you were in the room? Because I find I teach a class on reading the agreements. Well, I actually put in an entire semester's class worth before that just to explain enough of the context of how things work in order for them to grasp the language.
I don't think that I had trouble putting them into context. I think that the one thing that happened to me that was reading them in a school setting, they felt like these rigid laws instead of the sort of living thing that they are. And I think that it's harder to go from reading this and committing yourself to it and then also remembering to read the room, and that if you take a break in 56 minutes, the equity police don't show up, they don't, right? I've never had the experience. But I think that's sort of the only thing. I don't think that I had trouble with the context. I think I had trouble remembering that, like, you're still working with humans.
And that's the big point, right, is that there's people behind these rules. So I'm gonna ask the same question in a slightly different way to Bernita and Ruth and Ira about, because coming from my experience, I was working on productions as an intern or as a PA and getting the context from what was going on and then getting a little bit of the explanation of what the language said and why we made those decisions. Coming from your varied experiences of working, doing the work, being in the room with people before then you were really introduced to the language of the specific agreements, is there anything from your point of view that you learned or was surprising about what was in the agreements versus what the tradition was and what you were doing in the room?
I don't know that I'm like Bernita, I don't know that I remember what it was that struck me. It's a lot of rule book on the production contract. It's a very mature agreement. It's a healthy agreement, and it works pretty well. When I first encountered it almost 25 years ago, I think it would probably have just been the specificity of differences from, for instance, the Off-Broadway rulebook to the production contract. And of course, for a lot of it, it's very similar. I mean, the breaks are, 5 and 10 is the same in every contract across the equity landscape. Rehearsal hours vary, but they fall within a realm of sameness across the equity landscape. The regular days are 7 out of 8 or 7 out of 8.5, possibly 6 out of 7. But really, it's read one sentence and you grasp the difference. It's not as difficult or intricate as the idea of having to grasp the entirety of the book at one time makes it. You can function in a rehearsal setting and in a tech setting and in a performance setting, sort of learning as you go, in my opinion, pretty well, as long as you are diligent on keeping up and not just trying to wing it. Because if you wing it, then you'll make a mistake and the equity police will come. But I don't recall what struck, since the production contract's the one I'm speaking about, but the difference from when I went from other contracts, I don't recall what struck me as being, oh, well, that's really different on the production contract. Sorry.
What about you, Ruth?
Well, first of all, when I speak today, it's going to be about the LORT contract, because that's what I was asked to speak on. I have worked others. The first thing I caution everyone is there are minute differences between contracts in terms of hours, in terms of publicity rules, in terms of all kinds of things. So make sure when someone asks you a question or when you're scheduling something, actually know that you're doing LORT instead of CORST or COST or Off-Broadway. Just know, when someone asks me about a rule, I rarely speak from memory. I go, let's look at it together, which was taught to me years ago by a long past rep here at Equity who always said, let's read the rule together. I don't ever pretend to memorize a rule because I know I've got 4 other rule books in my head. I do play a game with a friend called How Long Have I Worked This Contract and How Did I Not Know This Rule? So what Ira says is absolutely true. You can get along without knowing the entirety of the book. And why you would want to fill your head with all of what's in every book is beyond me. You need to know what you need to know. And an actor or a director or a manager will tell you in a moment that you need to know something else. And then you'll go find it. You can work without learning the whole book. You can work without memorizing it. In fact, I think you should work without memorizing it.
There's not much that I can add to what's been said. I do agree that you shouldn't even try to memorize these books. I mean, I never have. I've worked under LORT, I've worked under Off-Broadway, I've worked under the production, I've worked under NEAT, I've worked at, NOLA. You just need to know the basics, which is the hours, a little bit about press and media. And that's why I personally highlight what's going to be relevant to me, but and the reps will tell you, I'm the first one to pick up the phone and go, hey, what does this really mean? What? This said, and I'm comparing it to other, when I'm working off-Broadway, which I guess I was asked to speak about more because I've been doing that lately. Even not anymore, but it used to be, there were two separate groups, the not-for-profit and the commercial. And the rules were so varied that in certain circumstances that I really had to study and I really had to look at it. But I worked 99% of the time without the book, without looking at it every day, trying to say, okay, I'm going to memorize rule number 56B8 today. I just don't do that. I don't think you need to. I think you need to have the book handy, whether it's on your iPad or in a paper in the room. I think it's important to have it in the room because you will find some directors and managers will say, no, the rule means this and this is what the rule is, and then you can just open it up and say, no, this is the rule, this is what it says. And then you can call your rep.
And I think that's what comes back around to, specifically for early career stage managers. I think what I found from all of our various experiences that it's not about memorizing. It's not about, and I hope that if you are learning these things in the classroom, there's no tests. There's no memorization tests and stuff. I think it's about learning how to read the language, learning how the agreements are laid out that you need to reference back often to different rules. It's about being able to read a rule in the agreement and having a context or having a scenario spring to mind where you think you understand what's going on, right? And so it's not about have I memorized this rule that I can get it right on a test. It's about, do I think I understand the context behind, the people behind what this language is supposed to mean? And if I don't, I'm going to seek out the advice of the rep or the advice to be able to put this language into a context. So I'm going to jump around. I gave our panelists a list of questions and things I might ask, but I'm going to go a little out of order. Mostly because, as these panelists have said, we put together a panel, and as you all heard from the various biographies, everyone has a wide variety of experiences and probably could speak to many different agreements, but we wanted to make sure that we had someone with a intuitive knowledge and a experience base on all of the three agreements that we were going to talk about today. So that's why everybody has been asked to sort of focus their work on an agreement. So I'm going to ask, first thing is, what would you want to know? What do you wish you knew about working under these agreements before you started working as an equity member?
For the Off-Broadway agreement, I wish that I knew and had a better understanding of the extra duties and negotiating yourself aside deal that is then filed with the union, and wrap my brain around that needing to happen, and that there are people who will assume that you are also the button sewer and the button pusher and the, and all of these other things. And I think knowing that you have that rule to point at, like, if you want me to do this, we have to sit down and have a negotiation about it, you and I. That's not something that I truly understood going into my professional career.
I have to say the same thing on the Off-Broadway contract about the additional duties. The first time I was given a contract and they said, well, you're going to run lights. And I said, no, that's not my job. And they were this particular producer was very adamant about me running lights, saying this is what you're going to do or you don't have the job. And I said, I'm a professional stage manager. You want a board out. I have run boards, but not as a stage manager. So if you want me to do that, you're gonna pay me this amount of money, or you can give the job to somebody else. That's how I felt. And that was, had I known that he was going to be that way, about almost forcing us to accept the fact that we have to run boards. I don't think I would have, I took the job, but I don't think I would have in hindsight. And to this day, when they ask me, they no longer tell me, because a lot of people know that I'm not gonna do it if you're not just because it says so in the book, but before it said so in the book. I was like, no, you have to pay me, because that's another person's job. And I am an equity stage manager, first and foremost.
For LORT theaters, there are 72 members of LORT. That's 72 members of the theater group called the League of Resident Theaters, and multiple independent theaters who use the contract. I wish I know how different they all operate and how differently the rules apply to each one.
I think my answer to this question is similar to what I believe the answer to a question Claudia hasn't asked yet is. And it was how the production contract interacts with the other contracts in the building. Because when you're working on a production contract, you're going to be working in a 100% unionized environment, which is not necessarily the case in Off-Broadway or LORT. It is occasionally, but it is certainly not usually and not all the time. And so the intersection of, I'll use the word manipulating, but I don't mean that pejoratively, but the intersection of manipulating the rules between the equity production contract and all of the other unions that you're intersecting with is tricky and is something that you learn fast and once, because you try not to make that mistake again. And so I wish I had known that, because I would have come better prepared in whatever way one can be better prepared for something like that. I started as an ASM on the production contract, and ASM for many years on many shows, both tour and here on Broadway before I became a PSM. So that's the other thing that's not really part of the question, but as the ASM, you are not responsible for the rules. I mean, you need to know them and you need to execute them and you need to have an understanding of them, but ultimately the weight of all that interpretation, such as it is, and enactment falls to the PSM, even, and then the business reps and the information that they provide. But as the ASM, I was happy to have the opportunity to observe it happening, kind of on my own time, as opposed to having to be in the moment.
That prompts, I think, a great discussion about what is the role of the other equity stage managers in the room, and in terms of interpretation, and what do you do when you're not the PSM? If there's a question about interpretation of a rule.
Well, I'll answer quickly. I think that if it's interpretation of a rule, then the responsibility is to sort of embrace that there's a question being asked and go directly to the PSM. I don't think I would, as Ruth has said, and I think Bernita and Erin as well, that I don't want to memorize 4 different books, and I don't even want to memorize 1 book. So I certainly would not expect any of my assistants to lay down the law, so to speak, in a situation, in a confrontation with an actor. If there's a question, I would be happy for them to have a conversation, and then when it came to needing an interpretation, they should come to me. I'd be surprised if anyone from management went to one of my assistants as opposed to me. And I think that in terms of interacting with the crew, I would not be surprised, and I think it's fine if the crew is asking questions of the assistants. But again, it boils down to when there's a need for an interpretation, that should come to me. It should come to the PSM.
I have nothing to add, I think Ira said it.
He did.
I agree, and while I like to say I have dabbled as a PSM, I consider myself mostly a career first and spent most of my career as a first, and so I always knew that my job would be the support aspect. You are another equity member, right? There's often, on a production contract, there's at least 2 other equity members on a musical. And while the weight of the interpretation will usually end up falling to the PSM, and the PSM is the one who's going to have those direct connections with the business rep and with the producers, my job as an equity member is also to help support those conversations and to speak up when there's a question and make sure it comes to the attention of the PSM, and help by looking at the language and being approaching it as a team and not saying, well, that's your job, I don't have to deal with that right now. So we'll move on to what is, this is one of the things that I think prompted the discussion or that we would have is there a rule in each of the contracts that you're focusing on that you think is the most misunderstood?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
So what is the first thing you do when you get a job? You try and figure out how much time off you can take. Honestly, putting pen to paper or having to choose something, I think the most misunderstood rule or rules in the production contract that prompts the most questions from the actors is, what is a personal day? What is a compelling circumstance day? When can I take one of those days? Wait, I can't take a vacation yet? When can I take a vacation? And wait, I'm not paid for a vacation? I am paid for a vacation? Figuring that out and laying out how it works, explaining the differences between the opportunities for time off and when you can take them. It's absolutely the most misunderstood rule in the production contract from an actor's perspective, and that is from actors making their Broadway debut and actors who have won Tony Awards.
In the LORT contract, I find that, as Ira said, he started as an actor and he wasn't really reading the book until he became a stage manager. I find there are many misunderstood rules, but I'm going to focus on one for LORT. And what do you do the first day of rehearsal on many of these contracts? You vote on things, right? Okay, so there used to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things you voted on at the top of a LORT day. 2 of them are gone now because with the most recent negotiations, the 6-hour rule, the 6-hour call no longer has to be voted on. And Beverly Sloan, my senior rep, is sitting back there. Beverly, please chime in if I say anything wrong because I don't want to make a mistake in front of this group. I would welcome the dialogue with you. So what's misunderstood about this? Well, let's take, for example, the option for a 1-hour meal break during rehearsal. The default for LORT is an hour and a half. And it can be voted down with a 2/3 majority to an hour. The most misunderstood thing I've found about this rule and about the other things you vote on is once you vote on them, that vote rules the day. Aha, the director can't schedule an hour and a half for lunch. The director has to give us this much time in between a rehearsal and a preview performance if you vote on it. No, these are options. These are options. The theater can still schedule, the theater meaning the director, if the theater, the producer, has given the director that option, the director can still schedule an hour and a half if he or she needs an hour and a half lunch break or has meetings over that lunch break. the option to take the break between a rehearsal and performance half hour from 2 hours to 1.5 hours. That's, again, it's an option. Actors and many company members think that once they vote, that's the rule. That's not the rule. That gives an option. That gives you a way to structure your day differently depending on the other needs of the production, not just the needs in the rehearsal hall. And I think that's one of the most misunderstood things about the LORT contract.
Off-Broadway, I think it's the MRE. Actors tend to think that means, well, I'm up for this show. I have this audition, so I'm not going to be here. I've encountered that a lot in this city, a lot. I think that's the most misunderstood rule in the Off-Broadway contract. They don't understand that it means more remunerative employment, that you're actually working, not auditioning to possibly get more work. And I've had long discussions with actors about, no, you can't be out for that. You have an audition, you schedule it either before, during your lunch hour, or after, but not, you can't tell me, I'm not gonna be here because I'm gonna be at CBS because they want me for some blah, 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 and I say,
Some of my answers have been taken. I was going to bring up the vote thing also. Off-Broadway, you vote 2/3 majority for the straight six, and I have had cast after cast after cast understand that that means that all of the days are straight sixes forever, and they will put them in their calendar that way. And if you call a 7 out of 8.5, they will be agog. So that is certainly true off-Broadway as well. I would also add to the MRE that as stage manager, something that I did not understand is more remunerative employment in off-Broadway requires that you are working under the 4 A's. You can't be taking a corporate gig where, you know, Barclays Bank is paying you $800 to call their conference and call it MRE. Technically, you might have a theater company that's nice to you and understands and gives you the day off, but it's nothing that you can call in for MRE via read the contract. The other thing I would add off Broadway is that is often misunderstood is the tech bump for stage managers and what that covers. I've heard producers say that it covers everything you can possibly think of. Well, you got your tech bump this week, so you can work 14 extra hours this week and all manner of other things.
And I think that we did a little polling of our representatives before we came on this panel, and I think both Walt and Maria, if you agree, it sounds like the things that come up to the business reps most often are the same rules that we talked about as the first thing you need to look at, which is rehearsal hours and days off, and especially those moments in the different agreements where there is provisions to change around the day off or work through a day off and how what that means later on, and those are the rules that seem to prompt the most calls. All right, do you agree? Is there any others off the top of your heads that you guys want to? Yeah.
Certainly in LORT, and I've had young stage managers ask me this, the media rule. The media rule in LORT is 10 pages long. And that's without the new rules that were negotiated at the last negotiation. It is dense, it is complicated, and it's very hard to pick out when a producer can capture, for how long they can capture, how often they can capture, and what they can use it for and what they can't use it for. Certainly in LORT, Dragica, are you here? Hi, Dragica. Dragica is from media, and certainly in LORT, if you have problems interpreting this rule, which I hope you'll agree is pretty dense and pretty difficult, please talk to her, and if there's anyone who wants to talk to her on break, please talk to her on break, because I would love to see at some point a one sheet that says, this is how long, this is how many times a week, this is how many cameras, this is how it can be used, this is what it's for, what it's called. Because actually, for stage managers, it's not the most misunderstood rule, but it is the most difficult rule in the LORT book. Thank you.
It's gonna be a run. You better get out quick.
That's why I asked her to come.
So this is not quite the same question, but what is the rule in each of your contracts that you would call the most obscure, the one that does not come up very often, but is something that you need to know about?
I have to share one that I found yesterday that I never, in all of my time, noticed, and I think it's amazing and hilarious. So this is about if something, and the producer shall reimburse the actor for loss and or damage to the actor's property used and or being used in connection with the play, covered in, whatever. So if your stuff is lost, stolen, damaged because of the show, you are up to a limit of $3,000 for the actor's personal effects and or clothing, up to a limit of $750 on the actor's furs. I found it and I was just like, this is delightful. So I went Googling for actors' furs, and this is like in dinner theater, it's in a couple of other places. Of course it is, because at one time it was applicable, but I just love that it's there. It makes me so happy, and I hope that it has come up at some point. I also, the other thing that I think people don't realize is that when you are doing a musical off-Broadway, and you have chorus employed under a chorus contract, capital C chorus, you are required on this contract to have 2 deputies, one for principal and one for chorus. It's different and a little bit different in each rule book. Some allow for it, but this one actually requires 2 deputies, which I think is interesting and also something that people don't really know.
LORT contract, an obscure rule, and this is the rule that started the game. How long have I worked this contract and why didn't I know that it was in here? I'll read it from my iPad. It actually has to do with stage managers, which is sort of applicable. H, working conditions for stage managers and assistant stage managers. The stage manager or assistant stage manager must be present at all rehearsals and performances. Okay, nothing surprising about that. Obscure part of rule. The theater shall not require members of the equity stage managerial staff to absent themselves from rehearsals or performances. Interesting. So when might this come into play? Well, on certain other contracts, when a director and or a choreographer say, we want to rehearse more hours today, but no equity member is going to go over the number of hours or have a longer day. But we director or choreographer, we're going to work 10 hours today. Well, hello, they've forgotten there are other people on the staff. There are stage managers on the staff. I have certainly had managers in other contracts say, stagger it. No stage manager can work more than the required numbers of hours. So one stage manager takes this portion of the day and then absents themselves, and the other stage manager takes this portion of the day. I have never had this come up in LORT. And Beverly, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that this says if the stage manager thinks there's a reason to have their assistant in the room, for example, if it's a rehearsal that requires 2 stage managers in the room for any reason, the theater shall not require members of the equity stage managerial staff to absent themselves from rehearsals or performance, which to me means they might have to pay a little overtime if the director or choreographer or any other staff member wants to schedule a longer day. I've never had this happen. I can't imagine a situation where it would happen once they'd be presented with this option, once you email the director and choreographer a copy to the manager as to what might trigger here. I can't see it happening, but I thought that was a rule I'd never seen before and I found it quite interesting. How much do you get for your furs?
I get $750.
Erin wins.
It has come up, and actually, there was a grievance not that long ago under the production contract about
furs?
Furs, art, necklaces. Yes, it's interesting. I'll look it up. But it does bring you back to a day. Obscure is an interesting word, and I think I tried to find something that I thought was obscure, and of course, after 25 years and actually being the guy at the table sitting next to the staff, I couldn't think of what I would think of as obscure. I found it hard, but then I remembered something that even well into my career, I had to call about, or would literally sit with the book and page through, because not only couldn't I remember what it was, I couldn't remember where to find it, which is an interesting thing about this book. By the way, I still have a book, unlike Claudia. This particular book, production contract, because Kimberly Rimbold, the senior business rep for production, knows that I have insisted that there always be a paper book, and I didn't like the minute and a half where there was a thought that we would be publishing a paper book. And I said, now of course it was before iPads, but nonetheless, I said, how do I stand on stage with my head carpenter and the deputy, or the company manager, and say, no, but this, and then flip 4 pages? I can't do that not gonna do that. So Kimberly made me a book, which I love. The published ones are now available. All right, so I think the obscure rule is in tech. And it's not an obscure rule, it's obscure rules. So you look to rehearsal hours during the final 7 days of rehearsal. You're thinking, all right, what do I do for my 10 out of 12? And it tells you during the final 7 days of rehearsal prior to the day of the first paid public performance, rehearsal shall not exceed 10 out of 12 consecutive hours a day. On the day of the first paid public performance, rehearsal and performance may exceed 10 hours and may encompass more than 12 hours as long as applicable rest periods. Okay, so first off, even reading that, it triggers so is the day of the first preview one of the 7 days of 10 out of 12s? And actually, the answer is no, it is not, because the rule says during the final 7 days of rehearsal prior to the day of the first public performance. So you say, okay, great. You look at your calendar, you see where's the first preview, and then you say, okay, 7 days, it's here, but wait, there's more. Then you have to go to rest periods and look at the days off rule. And during rehearsal, there are not one, but 2 rules that you have to take into account. If the first day of 10 out of 12s is before Thursday, and that was the thing for the life of me for years, I could just never remember which day it was. If the first day of 10 out of 12s is before Thursday, then no day off will be required in that week ending Sunday. If the 10 out of 12s begin on Thursday or after, then there is a day off required in that week. In the week of the first paid public performance, no day off will be required if the first paid public performance is on or after Tuesday. Meaning if your first performance is on a Monday, you've got to have a day off somewhere in that 7-day period. What that all boils down to is it is quite possible and is very common under the production contract to literally work 14 days in a row with no day off inside that 14 days. And where the day off comes before or after is not set. I mean, you don't have to have that Sunday off prior to that Monday of the first 14 days. There is a protection that does say, notwithstanding the above, 7 days of 10 out of 12s may not be followed by 16 consecutive performance days without a day, 16 consecutive performances without a day off. So I find that what has happened in decades and decades and decades of crafting what is the current production contract. Like I said, it is a mature, functioning, workable contract, but even within our, I'm taking up a lot of time, I apologize for this. Even within our own structure, forget about the fact that the industry itself, the interaction of the IATSE unions and the musicians unions and ours and how we interplay with each other. Within our own book, you get negotiations where a rule goes in, and it has impact on other rules that we all might have thought about, but you don't know how they're really going to play out until they do, and then you have to address them again in another cycle. So here we have a very straightforward notion. How do you schedule your tech period? And you literally have to consult no fewer than 4 rules to make sure that you're doing it properly. That's obscure.
So once you identified something like that, do you have a template that you work from that you try to use on every show?
Will you think less of me if I say no?
Do you have an idea then, if tech starts on any day of a week, how it works? Have you just learned that over the years?
Yes and no, but the thing is the day they've chosen for the first public performance. It all starts from the first preview. I have, only once, but I have convinced a show to change its first preview.
Because of that
It
schedule.
was, I was on board early enough, tickets had not yet gone on sale, and we looked at the calendar and so yeah.
But there's the key, right, is you have to be on board early enough to, those conversations have to
Yeah.
happen at a certain time.
I'm happy to say that for the most part, certainly not across the board, there are always new folks or ignorant folks within any arena, but most of the folks that are producing or managing under the production contract have enough experience in it that they've already figured out what it should or shouldn't be so that it's going to work for them and not cost them money and intersect with the other unions to some degree.
That's actually what I meant by a template. I didn't mean a piece of paper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's, reiterates what you were saying before about, for the production contract specifically, there are so many other unions involved, and the people who are making those decisions are used to balancing those decisions, where I think maybe some of the other agreements, you are working with people who have never worked with under the agreement before, or are only considering the equity agreement and are not considering anything else. And
I was going to get into that when you asked about unique aspects of an agreement.
all right, well, let's go there. What
Nope.
is unique?
Well, I mean, did everybody answer obscure? Was I the last?
Yeah.
So well, the unique aspect of the production contract is, I think there are 2 things. And again, it's not unique to the production contract because it is experienced in the other agreements, in LORT, in Off-Broadway, probably in others. But in the production contract, it's almost always that, one, you're going to have to understand or be involved with almost everything in the book that is part of the working day rules that are in this book. For instance, on a musical, as the stage manager on a production contract musical, you are going to have rehearsal in a studio, tech rehearsal in the theater, preview performances with rehearsals during the day. You are going to shoot B-roll. You are going to do things that involve television. You are going to appear at the Tony Awards or at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade or on one of the morning talk shows. You are going to encounter all of the different aspects of putting a show on and all of the aspects of the production contract that address things that are not about actually putting the show on, but about everything around it. So there's a need to have a familiarity with how those rules impact allowing those things to happen. And as I've said now, I think I'm about to say for the 3rd time, it's the interaction between the equity rules and the rules of all of the other unions that you are dealing with in the building. Putting together your 10 out of 12s, putting together your tech, you have to take into account when the local 1 stagehands are on a meal break and what breaks they have and when you're going into the 5th straight time hour or when you're going to hit double time. You have to take into account that the musician service is a 3-hour call and when they get their break. You have to take into account that if you're in previews and you only have 7 previews in a week, which is not uncommon that you only do 7 previews because the producers have allowed for extra rehearsal time, taking the place of what would have been the 8th performance, but the musicians owe you 8 services in a week, and therefore you can have a rehearsal with the orchestra for no additional cost. The misnomer of the 10 out of 12 for Actors Equity in a truly functional way is one of those places where the industry has impacted itself to get in our own way because of the way the local one rules apply to hours and breaks. There's no real productive way to have a 10-hour out of 12-hour rehearsal with the acting company in line with the stagehands during the take. So that becomes creative. Yeah, it's those two things that are unique, I think, to the production contract. The requirement to not only know the rules that are going to impact your fellow members in the rehearsal room or on stage, but the interaction with all of the outside entities.
LORT, unique. And I'm not going to look at my rule book at all. I'm going to go back to something I said before. We're dealing with institutions in New York, in LORT. We're dealing with non-profit institutions. They all run differently. My advice to you about uniqueness is when you arrive at a theater you've never worked for, you have to find out how they work. They're going to structure their tech period different from the last theater you worked at. They're going to structure their rehearsals. They may very well work afternoon evenings, and your 10 to 6:30 or your 10 to 7 model is out the window. These theaters have been around for decades. The people running them, in many of these cases, have also been around for decades. Although if you read any of the in and out news about administrators and artistic directors in LORT, there's a big turnover happening now. There's a shift. These theaters run the way they run, and for any one stage manager to come in and try to change the way they run is sometimes really counterproductive. They use the rules differently. It doesn't mean they're breaking the rules. It means they use them differently. You're going to go to a theater that has 4 student matinees in a week, and what does that mean for the rest of the week, and how the rules work with that. You're going to go to theaters that may actually have misunderstood a rule, and how do you work with them? It happened to me, the 6-hour rule, how if you're using the 6-hour rehearsal call on an occasional basis, meaning not every day in a week, there is no other call that day. In LORT, you can't do a costume fitting if you're using the occasional rule on a 6-hour day. And I encountered a theater that had been doing just that for decades. And how do you, or decades, as long as the 6-hour rule has been around, I can't say how long that is. How do you effectively speak to that and make an institution that has institutionalized something change their ways? So what's unique about LORT is every theater that uses the book, and I'm sure Off-Broadway, it's not that unique, I'm sure it happens in Off-Broadway too, that every company that uses the book tries to use it a little differently. You have to be incredibly cognizant and incredibly sensitive to each theater's needs and the way they use the rules. Thank you.
I think Ruthie said when she said Off-Broadway, every Off-Broadway theater is different. The ones I've worked in, every single one of them interpret every single rule differently. The biggest factor with any of these is the fact that we're all human. And that's something that, rules and no rules, you have to remember when you walk into a room. That you're dealing with your fellow humans, and it's not about being, I can't even think of the word right now. You have to be able to be a little bit flexible within the rules, and that's, for me, that's the biggest thing. You can't. I've worked with people when I've assisted who demanded that this is what it is and this is what it says, and you can't change what it says, and it's a company that's been doing working a particular rule in a particular way, and this is how we do it. And that goes with the schedule, or like you said, tech schedule in particular. You just have to use your common sense, which I think a lot of us forget.
In terms of Off-Broadway and uniqueness, I don't think that this rule doesn't exist anywhere else, but I don't think it exists a lot of other places. And I think that everyone believes that it exists in every single contract. So that's part of why I bring it up. And it is notes. Notes may not be given after the half-hour call, except by the stage manager, dance captain, or fight captain. And I think that it is the unicorn of rules. Everybody thinks that it is in every contract. And it is actually written here in the Off-Broadway contract, but I do believe that Off-Broadway is fairly unique amongst our contracts in actually having that rule written down.
It is not in LORT. There's no rule in LORT about giving notes.
There's no rule in most of the contracts.
When do you give notes? You give notes at the Yeah, that's when you give notes.
Interesting. All right, so we are about 2 minutes away from a break time. This is your 2-minute warning for a break. But I promised Erin I would ask this question. So this is the speed round.
Okay.
Okay. Favorite rule.
Oh, I just told you my favorite rule. That's my favorite rule. The note rule.
Bernita, do you have a favorite?
LORT, after 4 previews, you can have a 1-hour note session. That 1-hour note session comes off the rehearsal time for the next day.
I don't know.
A favorite rule?
A favorite rule? Well, everybody loves estoppel. Estoppel is, I think, in every collectively bargained agreement because it's labor legalese, and it basically says that equity can do what it needs to do, but they can also, am I saying it right, Walt? They can do, all right, Walt, you're going to be on camera. Come on up. Or this might happen. Walt, come to the lectern and in 2 sentences or less, explain estoppel. You can read it first, but then you have to explain it. Oh, really? Did it come out of LORT?
I don't see it.
Oh, okay. Well, it's still in the production. Walt Kiskaddon, one of our business reps. He's currently my business rep.
Okay, I don't know if this one is working, but hopefully it is. Yeah. What?
I thought it was on top.
No, it sounds like it is.
It's on. I hear you.
It's working.
So this is perhaps also the shortest rule in the production contract because it's a sentence by itself. Rule 26 estoppel. Reasons given by equity for requiring actors to do any act, such as withdrawing from a cast, shall not preclude equity from giving or relying on other or different valid reasons for its action.
And that means
Well, what it says. What's this whole interpret rules? It just says what it says.
That's what it says.
So I believe this means that if they are able to show that the reason that was given isn't actually correct, it doesn't mean we can't have a different reason that is valid.
And there you go. Estoppel.
So a very interesting obscure note. The Disney Theatrical Productions requires us to have a separate full rule book for Disney, even though it is exactly the same. All of the substantive rules are the same. There are rules that are different because they are a single employer instead of a part of the group of the Broadway League. And for their reasons, if you look at the Disney Theatrical Broadway production rulebook with us, it will say Rule 26 intentionally omitted because they refuse to have it published in their book. I refuse to delete it and have all the rule numbers changed so they'd be different from the other rules. So there's space so the rules, so they come and they land on the same place on every page, the numbers are the same. It's in our side letter with them, so it's still legally binding against them, but they refuse to have it printed so everyone could see it.
Wow.
The most obscure thing about the most obscure rule.
I will tell you that one of the first rules that I became aware of when I was working on a Broadway show at the Mont, which is on the LORT contract, that all of the actors in New York misunderstand when they're not working on a production contract or think is on the contract is the day after day off rule and the overtime rehearsing day after day off. And I find that when people are used to working on production and then they move to Off-Broadway or LORT or anything and they do not get paid overtime for day after day off, they are not happy about it. But that seems like a good place to.
Before we take our break, I just want the room to know that on the production contract, the limit for loss and damage reimbursement for your firm is $3,000.
Oh.
And it is not mentioned in LORT.
So, that completes today's panel. Thanks to Claudia Lynch, our moderator, to my fellow panelists, Erin, Maureen, Koster, Ira, Mont, and Bernita Robinson. And thank you to the equity staff for their assistance, Beverly, Sloan, and Maria Cameron, Louise Foisey and Walt Kiskaddon, Dragica, Dabo, Kathleen Munroe, and Tom Miller. Thank you for joining us.